There's also a kind of religious aspect of this, as a lot of musicians, a lot of artists always talk about how they're kind of channeling something else outside of them when it comes to creating a lot of this. We see Marina Abramovich do this with her famous kind of cooking dinners that she has as well. This is Lukadowski here of wearechange.org in Nashville, Tennessee, joined with some really cool, awesome people. As of course, we got Jay Dyer, Mike Benz also in the house here, as we had a very fascinating conversation over lunch about art, symbology, the larger kind of demoralization efforts, as we were talking about Dying Corp. And, of course, Marina Abramovich having her own State Department page, which is just mind-blowing to say the least here. I just found out about
this 5 minutes ago, and it blew my mind.
Yeah, and learning about art and subversion is something that, of course, I wanted to talk to you guys about, especially with what we just seen at the Olympics, which clearly, to me, is just an absolute kind of attack on family values, Christianity. There was even a portion of that had the Statue of Liberty that specifically was seen all beat up. I was wondering, what are your guys' reaction to the Olympic ceremonies that you guys just saw?
Well, I think NBC's takedown says it all. The fact that they don't want it reproduced, that because of the blowback suggests that they know the hornet's nest they stepped on, and that they feel that the right wing or people who are not on their side have sort of identified that they're trying to perhaps destroy traditional culture. They're trying to destroy religious symbology. I think advertisers pulling out has spoken a fair amount, and they're trying to delete history via DMCA.
Yeah, I think the guy having his member out, hanging out with small children, also was kind of a larger issue here. Jay, you talk about the larger kind of religious symbolic aspects of a lot of this, and it does seem like they're kind of rubbing it in people's faces. What was your reaction to everything?
Well, they're rubbing the members in people's faces too.
Yes.
And so it's funny, the fourth hour that I did on Alex Jones 2 weeks ago was about the hermaphroditic symbolism of Baphomet. And Baphomet actually goes back to, you can go back to the Middle Ages with Kabbalists. The medieval Kabbalists believed that God was a deity that had both organs, both sexes. And you can actually go back earlier than that to Plato. Plato in his Timaeus taught that God, the being that is all things, is bisexual. So there's actually a higher kind of an occultic aspect to this, which I think they see not just from a ritual perspective, but also for a social engineering perspective, that they can create more and more sterile people who can't pair bond and can't have offspring by the promotion of this ideology.
Yeah, and for me, if you go deeper down the rabbit hole, there's also a transhumanist agenda to a lot of this as well, that is pushing into kind of the singularity, the elites living forever, the individuals who, of course, want to be gods on this earth, as, of course, the best way to become gods is to make everyone kind of godless and make them empowered through the technological kind of technocratic, spiritual kind of aspects of it. And art, to me, is also something that is, beautiful, something that could uplift people, but also something specifically that could demoralize people, that could attack people, that could destroy their kind of inner sense of kind of power and authority over themselves, and kind of subjugate them as well. So it's interesting because, Mike, you were just talking about the larger kind of historical context of this. Marina Abramovich being at the State Department is another aspect of it. What's your take on it as well?
Did you know that Marina Abramovich, I'm just reading this right now. I didn't know this, that she grew up in Serbia and lived there until 2001. Now the CIA and NATO overthrew the government of Yugoslavia in 2000. So she happened to be right in the conflict zone and then moved to the United States right after the CIA overthrew her country. I mean, how far back does this go? I guess, all right, just getting back to the artwork thing. We were talking about what is she actually doing in UK. So I just learned that she has a formal State Department page and is working with children in Ukraine. And we were talking about what the purpose of this might be. It's obviously speculation, but what we were talking about is the role of art and symbology in essentially managing the political ecosystem in a country. When you are in control of the artwork and the symbology and the mythology about what Ukrainians think about Russia, what they think about NATO, how the different, things that they encounter on the street or in public buildings reflect a sort of pro-NATO or a pro-Russia vision in the place, that's going to seep into the hearts and minds of the young ones. It's going to seep into the hearts and minds of everybody across civil society. And so there's an emphasis on art as a means of either dissident activity when we want to overthrow a country, or counterinsurgency activity when we want to throw someone else out. And we saw this with street protests and street murals in Hong Kong with the, CIA-backed activity there. And I'm not even saying it's a bad thing. It just is what it is. There was all this visual art to take down the Berlin Wall when the CIA was working on that in Germany. We do this in music. This is like the aesthetics of Riot, which is another one of these CIA-backed musical groups that was piped into Russia in 2010-ish, before we did the right-wing style coup from the Alexei Navalny side. But control over culture, and Jay was just talking about this earlier, but we had something called the Congress for Cultural Freedom in this country, which was our big export for CIA, both on the visual arts and on the musical arts side. And I don't know if maybe that's a good segue if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, what you're talking about automatically made me think about my time in Venezuela. I was there during the economic collapse, and everywhere you went, they had the eyes watching you, and the Chavista territories that, of course, gang members spray painted everywhere as a symbol of, this is the Chavista area, this is the communist area. You better not be a capitalist in these parts of towns. And those eyeballs from the government of Chavez watching everything was very kind of indicative to this kind of Orwellian idea that we have of propaganda and art, that it was also utilized in those kind of famous fictional films.
And on that street art thing, there's an interesting corollary with, I just mentioned the riot era of the State Department left-wing coup attempts in Moscow. Adjacent to that were street muralists who turned out, appear to have been on National Endowment for Democracy payroll, which means CIA payroll, doing gay Putin art. That is, and this resulted in gay Putin symbology being outlawed in Russia, because you had these U.S. embassy-linked street graffiti artists painting murals of Putin kissing other people, making their leader gay, rainbows and things like that. And that was seen to be discrediting to the Russian state. But this is like LGBT, you can launder this as like LGBT human rights propaganda, but it's effectively, discrediting a paternalistic political culture and fomenting, revolt from the inside by humiliating the leader. And so, this is another example of street art and graffiti and symbology being effectively an instrument of statecraft by U.S. embassies in order to determine the fate of politics from the inside of a foreign country.
I'm automatically thinking about Banksy and some of his more kind of liberal woke ideologies that also is promoted in some of his art, which is seen as counterculture and subversive. But there's a history of intel agencies using that as a way to get their kind of plans and initiatives passed. Jay, there's also a kind of religious aspect of this, as a lot of musicians, a lot of artists always talk about how they're kind of channeling something else outside of them when it comes to creating a lot of this. We see Marina Abramovich do this with her famous kind of cooking dinners that she has as well. What's the kind of religious connection do you see with art, state, and propaganda as well? Because I think there's a clear one as well.
I'm glad that Mike mentioned because I remember when that happened, and it was Michael McFowle that was running that, and he told them to go inside different Russian Orthodox churches and actually commit like actions of blasphemy. So the girls would go in with their punk music, and they would like strip down and take their, the tops off.
Holy.
Yeah. And then this mirrors what the revolutionaries did in the French Revolution, where they went into the Cathedral Notre Dame and they put a hoe up on the altar and said that this was the goddess reason. So I think this is called aesthetic terrorism in some of the literature. And the idea here is that you can brutalize and terrorize the public through the arts. And that's why Plato, I'm not a huge fan of Plato. He's sort of the proto, philosopher king communist. He's the daddy of communism. But Plato said that you have to control the arts because the arts have the ability to spark off these kinds of revolutions amongst the people, amongst the population. If you don't control it, the kind of like the elites, the oligarchs will make the population pop off with their passions being uncontrolled, right? So they'll lose. The 60s counterculture is a great example of this, which was also heavily CIA funded, supported by the Esselinists, who was a big establishment entity. So you're absolutely right that the elites will utilize the arts, not just in a social revolutionary perspective. That's a big part of it, but they'll also revolutionize the religious ideology of a society. And they do that a lot of times through this kind of brutalization, this kind of occultic type stuff.
Yeah. A lot of people think, oh, they're just abandoned in Russia, but they don't understand some of the really weird, awful kind of stuff that they did that, we don't really hear in the kind of Western backed media as well. But I think this is why memes, counterculture, t-shirts, rizzing people up, and of course, most importantly, just being able to use this kind of art in a way makes us kind of understand the larger kind of context of how absolutely critically important it is. And this is why a lot of people are saying the kind of Olympics were the last kind of straw that broke the camel's back. For a lot of people who, of course, are just trying to enjoy the Olympics, there's a lot of occult symbology there as well. There's a lot of occult history there as well, especially from the funny guy with the mustache from World War II. That, of course, dates back to a lot of the larger kind of globalist visions that they were trying to, of course, push through as well. So the Olympic history and the globalist history is also another kind of fascinating vector that I think is important to look at. I don't know if you were able to check out some of it as well.
If you go back to like the 2012 Olympics, if I recall, that was the one where it was the UK and they had a giant octopus, and the octopus symbolized the establishment kind of taking over the world. They had the Harry Potter, Voldemort, children in the hospital bed scenario, which some people have theorized might relate to, recent events. I don't know about that, but regardless, we do know that when they bring in, big Hollywood directors and people like that to organize these events, they're high profile rituals, as my wife wrote about in her book. I have 2 books on this as well. And, they're programming, I think, the subconscious with these rituals to get us to accept ultimately the technocratic and transhumanist agenda that you just talked about. This more recent Olympics, I think, had to do with the really just championing of the transhumanist, I guess you could say, as well as you pointed out, trans agenda prepares the way for the acceptance of transhumanism. And so when you promote that through the arts and through these high profile rituals, it's just a way to kind of gradually acclimate the public to the acceptance of whatever the technocrats have next. And it's also intentionally blasphemous. That's what the point of all of the religious and Christian anti-Christian inversion. So it's a inversionist strategy where you flip the meaning of these things to be the opposite of them. And so you have, instead of Christ in the traditional, poses, you have now a trans or a lesbian Christ. And I think that's done intentionally as aesthetic warfare.
Yeah, the Christ figure that was in the Olympics came out as a proud, non-binary Jewish lesbian, and it's like, okay, that obese person that clearly isn't watching what they're eating and not taking care of themselves. As we literally have a golden cow behind us, which I thought was the perfect scenery to do all of this. Mike, do you have any other closing comments on art and our kind of trajectory as a society, as we were just talking about the importance of memes, the importance of humor, the importance of having a cow's butt in the background of our whole show here? Any last closing comments on everything we just discussed?
Art is an instrument of statecraft. Memes are an instrument of statecraft. But the cool thing for the good guys is they really suck at it, because it has to come from the soul. And I'm not yet convinced that they have one. No, I'm just kidding. I love everyone. But yes, they really do suck at authentic, organic artwork, which is why it all looks like crap. And that's why, beauty is in the classics.
Yep. And the Pentagon has been literally trying to weaponize memes for about 15 years now. We had the internal documents that we were showing on our show a long time ago. So Mike, Jay, thank you so much for joining us. Mike, where can people find out more information about
on that? X at Mike Ben Cyber.
Awesome. Jay, where can people find you?
X as well. Jay Dyer, also, the 4th hour of the Alex Jones Show every Friday and on YouTube.
Fascinating conversation. The dinner here was also, or lunch here was absolutely amazing as well. If you like this content, subscribe. Stay tuned for more here on youtube.com/wearechange.